What am I doing? All right. Let's see. Hello. A little higher. Oh. Hello. Okay. All right. What's going on? Where are we? Week 9. One more week. All right. Homework 6 is up. It's due next Friday. It's pretty much what we've covered this week, except for the last question, question 7. And we'll talk about that on Monday. Okay, that will take you about 2 minutes. And then there's question 1, which I have added based on feedback from the readers. Apparently they're finding several submissions that fail to identify where the problems are. And the way GradeScope works is that they grade one problem at a time, and it takes them to the page with the problem. So if you didn't select the page, they have to go search which page it's on. And they might not find it. And then they've been dealing with regrade requests when they didn't find it. So they've asked me to see if I can do something. And so problem 1 is worth 0 points. And if you've been selecting your pages, nothing, it's like there's no problem there. Don't need to do anything different. But if you haven't been, and you've just been uploading without selecting which pages your problems are on, then you will, they can deduct points. So this is kind of an experiment. It doesn't really make sense to do this on the last homework. But this is an experiment, I guess, for next quarter. Any questions? Okay, let's see where we are. So today we're going to talk about how to build D flip-flops. And in lab 7, you're going to build 2 circuits on a breadboard. You're going to have little chips, discrete parts with gates on them, and you're going to wire them together. And one of them, the ring oscillator, you'll have to display the output on the scope. So you'll have to learn to use the scope if you haven't already. I don't think this is much of a problem now because most students in 100 have already had E101, right? That didn't used to be the case, but it is now. But anyway, there is an instruction on how to use the scope in a little video if you're not familiar with the scopes. And I will go over lab 7 on Monday. On Tuesday, you need to show up to your section within the first 10 minutes to pick up your lab kit because you will need parts to do lab 7. You cannot do lab 7 with Vivado. Vivado will not be involved in lab 7. If you can come to an earlier section to get your parts if you want, but bells will only be there in the first 10 minutes of a section. So if you arrive to your section late, you'll have to go downstairs to bells and get your kits. You won't be able to do much without your kit. Lab 7 is intentionally light because it's the last week of the quarter. And some people, if they're come prepared to wire everything up, it will actually be done in the first lab section. Okay, that's perfectly feasible. So the time it takes you to do Lab 7 is largely determined by how careful you are. Finding wiring mistakes, there's nothing that's going to tell you have multi-driven nets or that you have an input that's unknown. Right? You're just going to have to stare at it and realize what's wrong and trace the wires. Okay. So you're on your own as far as wiring your circuit to go. No help from Vivado. Okay, and no simulation. And if you wire up a part wrong, you may need a new part. Okay, so we'll go over that on Monday, and then on Wednesday we'll actually talk about what's inside that FPGA that you've been using all quarter. And Friday is open for whatever you want to review. Again, so it'll be driven by whatever problems people want to see. Okay. Yes?
Will the exam be the full 2 hours on finals week?
It's actually 3 hours, isn't it?
Yeah, that amount.
Okay. That amount? Okay. Actually, it'd only be 2.5 hours. 3 hours is a long time, yes.
Will the final be cumulative?
Yes, everything since 3rd grade. But, obviously it's going to be more emphasis on the later stuff. There is, I'm not sure if it's enabled yet, but there will be a sample final again in Canvas to give you an impression of what will be covered. Any other questions? No. Okay, flip-flops. All right. Finally, we've hidden what's inside flip-flops until now. All right, so we have been talking for the last 7 weeks about sequential logic, which needs some kind of memory and has feedback. And as you've seen examples, these can oscillate for a while. And they might settle, they might not. There are lots of issues that can happen. They might go to different states depending on the delay. And then we get into environmental factors like temperature, which could affect the outcome. Noise, they're very sensitive and very hard to predict. And to get a handle on this and to make sense of what's going to happen and to have some rules for our sequential designs, we stick to what's called synchronous sequential design. And in synchronous sequential design, the idea is all of our gates can only change during a fixed period, and then that change has to come to a stop. And we do that by interrupting the feedback with what we call flip-flops or gated elements here. So a clock is responsible for preventing feedback. And so if you shut down these boxes so that their outputs are frozen, this must settle. There's no loops in here. Okay, so essentially what we've done is we've hidden the loops inside these boxes. Each of these boxes, in fact, is an asynchronous device. Okay, and so when we talk about sequential asynchronous logic, we're talking about logic where we are imposing constraints so that we can manage when the states change and synchronize when the changes occur based on a clock. Now, you may have systems that have multiple clocks. In fact, all of your labs have had 2 clocks. There's the one from the board, and then there's the one I give you. Right? And you never use the one on the board, you just use the one I give you. So your actual design is synchronous with the clock that comes out of the lab clock module. Okay. And so this makes life a whole lot simpler, because when we design our logic, we don't have to worry about oscillation or timing in here. We just need to meet the timing requirements of our flip-flops, and we study these really hard to get very specific timing constraints from them. And when we design the logic, we know we need to meet those timing constraints. And okay. All right, so some definitions, which you probably already know. So the periodic signal that synchronizes the updates is called a clock, and the devices that update the memory is, we'll call those flip-flops, or we could call them latches, but that's slightly different. We'll talk about those too. And the clocks themselves have to be carefully designed so that they have, they're stable and they have a specific shape. We worry about the actual time, rise and fall time of clocks. That's important. There's the duty cycle, which is what percent of the time are they high versus low. All of your clocks have been 50%. They've been high for the same amount of time as they've been low. And of course the clock period, which is the length of a clock cycle, which determines the speed of your design. Okay, flip-flops themselves, though, are asynchronous circuits. They have combinational loops. Okay, so let's talk about how we designed flip-flops. So a basic design of a flip-flop is based on two cross-coupled gates. They're basically they're in a loop, or we can draw them this way. And we will call one input R, the other input S, and we will label the two gate outputs Q and Q bar, and you'll see why we call them that in a minute. The important thing to remember about a NOR gate is when one input is 0, basically this is then acting as an inverter on the other input. So if D is the other input, you will get the complement of D, not D on the output. On the other hand, if a particular input is 1, then the output is 0, regardless. So 1 holds the output to 0. Okay, so if we look at what's happening in our RS latch, if both inputs are 0, what's happening is we have two inverters, right? Because when one input to the NOR gate is 0, the NOR gate acts as an inverter on the other input. So we have two inverters in a loop. And that's very stable. That won't change. And it might be that the bottom NOR gate is 1 and the top one is 0, or it could be the other way. And that's how we remember something. We remember a 1 or a 0. We remember 1 bit, depending on which state we're at. And this won't change unless we change RS. Okay. All right, so let's see. What's this Q bar doing up here? Okay. All right, so let's see what happens when we change R and S. Well, when S goes from 0 to 1, so S is going to go to 0 to 1, that's going to invert this value, right? Oh, sorry, when 1 forces Q bar low. It's the other way. Okay. Do you want to see that again? Okay. S is going to go high, right? And when an input to an OR gate is high, it forces the output low. So this is going to force Q bar low, which is going to force Q high. And then we could keep changing S, and nothing more would happen. So basically what we've done is by making S high, we forced Q high and Q bar low. So we've basically set this particular RS latch to value 1. We made Q high. Now, what about the other way? Suppose we make R low to begin, and then we make it high. We're going to reset Q and set Q bar, and then it's going to stay that way no matter how many times we change R and S. R. Right, so I'm guessing you know what R and S stand for now. Right? Set and reset. Okay. So of course, you get a new device and the instructions say don't do that. So that's the first thing you do. What if S and R are both high? Well, if S and R are both high, what's going to happen is Q and Q bar are both going to be low. And, maybe that's not great, but if you are using Q and expecting that Q bar is not Q, and you're using those two values in your circuit, you're not going to be happy. Right? Your logic will not evaluate correctly if Q bar and Q are both 0. Okay, so that's maybe an issue. All right. But there's something worse that can happen. Suppose they are both 1 and they go to 0. Right? So right now, both NOR gates are being forced to 0. But when we change R and S to 0, those NOR gates are going to turn back into inverters. But they both have the same value, so they're going to start pushing each other to the opposite value, right? And around and around and around it goes, and where it ends, no one knows. Sorry. Okay, so this is how we could get an oscillation. This is a race condition, right? Those two inverters are chasing each other, forcing each other to the opposite value, and eventually, one of them will win. Nature will resolve this, and it'll go to either 1 or 0, but we don't know how long it could oscillate. This event has a name. Anybody know? I've heard of metastability. Yeah, it could oscillate for quite a while. The other thing it could do is it could hover in the middle. Right? Remember, voltage is a 0 or 1, so they might, depending on how those inverters are constructed or how sharp these signals are, they could be in between 1s and 0s. Okay. Nothing special about NORs. We can do the exact same thing with NAND gates. 2 NAND gates. This discussion is based on 2 NORs, but you could have NAND gates. Some of you next week will have NORs in your kit, and some of you will have NANDs. And there is equivalent design using NANDs to the NOR design. The only difference is, of course, now a 0 forces a value, and a 1 makes it an inverter. So these R and S are now active low. Basically, you reset this when R is low, and you set it when R is low, when S is low. That's the only difference. Okay, but let's stick to the NORs. Okay, all right. So this is kind of summarizing how this RS latch works. When R is high, Q will go low and Q bar will go high. And then when R goes back low, it will stay that way. If S is high, then Q will go high and Q bar will go low. If they're both high, then Q and Q bar will both be low. And then let's say they're both high and S goes low, then it'll be as if R was the only one that was high. Okay, that will resolve itself. Of course, the problem that we want to avoid, the absolute worst thing that we could do is have them both high and then make them both go low. If we do that, there's a possibility Q and Q bar could oscillate for a while. Okay, don't want to do that. I want to avoid that. Okay, so let's build some more useful devices. Okay, so we want to synchronize when these things change. So one way to do this is to throw AND gates on the R and S controls here to prevent this RS latch from changing unless the clock is high. So as you can see, we have our RS latch here. This used to be R, this used to be S, but now we're ANDing them with the clock. So when the clock is low, nothing's going through. This is going to stay the way it is. Nothing's going to happen. But when the clock is high, then R and S are getting through, and this is behaving just like an RS latch. The thing, of course, that we really want to avoid is having R and S high right when the clock goes low. Because if R and S are high, then these two are high, and because they're now synchronized by the clock, they will both go from 1 to 0 at the same time. Okay, so be careful. Don't want that to happen. Okay, and then it's simple to make what we call a gated D latch. When we want to store a 1, when D is high, we set the RS latch to 1, and when D is low, we reset it. And we use the clock to prevent any change when the clock is low. Okay, this is what we call a latch. It's not a flip-flop. Okay, and this would be the table that summarizes. When the clock is 0, doesn't matter what D is, you're going to stay the way you were. When the clock is 1, though, whatever change you see on D will affect RS. Not just at the edge, but any time the clock is high. This is not edge sensitive. Right? So, I mean, a latch is different from a flip-flop. We've been using flip-flops, edge-triggered devices, this quarter. It makes our life easier. Okay, so the difference between a latch, which is called a level-sensitive device, and an edge-triggered device is the following. Okay, so we have a clock. They both have a clock. You'll see the little caret here. Again, that means that this is sensitive to an edge. And because there's no bubble here, it means that it's the positive edge. So when the clock is high, the latch will follow the D input. It will be a little delay. But once the clock goes low, the latch will stay. It will no longer follow D. Okay, so again, here it's following D, and now it's just staying put, and now it's following D. So if you've got any kind of instability or changes in D, you'll see that on the latch output if the clock is high. On the other hand, the edge device, the edge-triggered device, only sensitive to what the value of D is right at the clock edge. In this case, the rising clock edge. So you can see that there's really no change within a clock cycle. The change occurs right after the clock edge. Okay, so this is the D flip-flop we introduced 6 weeks ago. Okay, so how do we build one of these things? All right, so this is one way. And well, I'll explain. This was a design, the original way. Well, there are various different ways to build flip-flops, but there's a smaller design that I'll show you next. So this is probably the easier one to design, but it's not the one you want to use in the lab because it's very sensitive to noise, especially on the clock, and I see people have problems with that. Okay, and it requires more wiring and more gates. All right, but this is how it works. You have 2 D latches, right? These are level sensitive devices. And this is going to be a negative edge triggered, meaning that it will load on the falling edge. If you want it to load on the rising edge, just put another inverter here. Okay, so what's going on? Well, when the clock is high, what's happening is the first latch is open. It's letting D go all the way through that first latch, and that first latch is going to hold D. And D can change. It can go up and down because this latch is going to stop it. This latch has a 0. So nothing's going to get through. So while the clock is high, D is moving here. And then the clock is going to go from high to low. When the clock goes from high to low, the first latch is going to freeze with whatever value it had at that point, and the second latch will let it out. Okay, so whatever value was there right at the falling clock edge is captured and held by the first latch. And then it's allowed out by the second. How many of you have been to locks, canal locks? So it's pretty much the same idea. You know, you in like a Panama Canal, you let one ship come in, close the second one, and then you let it out the other way, right? So that's what's going on. Or how about the doors? How many of you have been to the San Jose airport? Okay, so you've left the airport. There's 2 sets of doors, right? One of them lets you in, and closes behind you, and then you can go out the other one. Can't go backwards. Okay, so that's one way to build an edge-triggered flip-flop. Does that make sense? Basically, you can't have any change on D no longer is going to be affected here while the clock is high, and any change before that is not going to have an effect on the output because this one's locked down. So one of the 2 is always locked down, preventing D from affecting Q, except that whatever value is on D right at the clock edge gets held and allowed out. Okay. All right. Yes?
Just to confirm, that's the falling clock edge in this case?
Yes.
The value of D is held and the clock edge falls?
Right. This is a falling edge. The negative edge triggered. If you want a positive edge triggered, what we just do is change the polarity of the clock. I could put an inverter here, right? And then suddenly it's positive edge triggered. That makes the design a little bit smaller than doing it the other way. All right. This is a more complicated design, but it has fewer gates and it will cause you less problems. It requires a total of 6 NOR gates. One key important thing is that this particular NOR gate has to have 3 inputs, not 2. So when you get your parts next week, you will get parts that have 2 input NOR gates. Okay, so pay attention to the 3 input. You're going to need to do something to implement a 3 input NOR gate. Okay, so how does this work? So this particular design is also a negative edge triggered flip-flop. And it basically has 3 RS latches here. And what's going on here is this latch is holding the complement of D. So I've color-coded things here. Green is 1, red is 0. D could be 0 or 1, either value, but blue is whatever D is not. It's not D. It's the complement of D. And because of the way the logic works, if this is D, then this is not D. And basically this latch is, right now it's frozen. We're resetting it. And this Q bar is also held at 0. So this final RS latch, which is the one providing the outputs, its 2 inputs are 0, so it's not going to change. So as long as the clock is 1, changing D will have no effect on the final output. But we do need to make its way through. We need the D value to actually make it all the way to this gate and all the way to this gate here. Okay, because now we are about to make the clock go low. And that's the edge we care about, from high to low. So, so again, while the clock is 1, changing D doesn't have any effect on the last RS latch. Okay. But when we make the clock go low, we're actually going to load the value into excuse me, that last latch. I hope. I think we made the clock low. What happened? Okay. Ooh, that S went through. And the blue went through. So that, when we made the clock go low, we're sending S and R the values of D and D bar. So that last latch is going to take on the value of D. D is 1, we're going to set it. If D is 0, we're going to reset it. Okay, so making the clock go low made that latch. But it did something else very important, and that is it provided feedback here. So this wire is going to come back into that 3 input NOR gate, and that's going to prevent any further change, because this wire is going to keep these guys from changing until we get back to 1, until the clock goes high again. Okay, and when the clock goes high again, these 2 have to be 0. Okay, so let's check that. Okay, so clock is 0, and the flip-flop has settled. What happens if D changes now? We don't want anything to change the final latch here. Well, all right, so there's 2 cases. Suppose D was 0. So if D is 0, that means that we reset this. Now if we make D 1, you see that it doesn't do anything. It doesn't get anywhere. Q bar still stays low, and Q still stays high. Okay, let's try the opposite case. D is 1, So if we make D go 0, this actually is going to cause a small change, but this is still going to be high. Okay. Now, the reason it's still high is because of this feedback wire here. That will prevent it from actually going low again. Okay. And then finally, when we put the clock back, it'll be stuck. All right. So only the value of D right at the falling edge matters. That's the value that will be captured and held. Now, there's a couple things to observe. First of all, for this to work right, we need the value of D to have propagated far enough into it. It has to have reached these gates. So D has to be there before the clock falls. This is our setup time. We need D to be present and stable. The other thing is we need D to stay there while these signals are circulating. Particularly, we need D to not change again before this feedback comes and locks in this NOR gate. And that's the hold time. That's after we made the clock fall. So D has to be stable in a little window. Excuse me. No. Okay. All right, so let's see what happens when we violate the hold time. All right, so we are going to we just made the clock go low, and this is going to start to propagate now, and then we're going to change D before this is all settled. Are you ready? Okay, here we go. Okay, this is now going low. Oh, there we were setting that flip. Oh wait, D changed. Oh no. Wait, they're both 1. I can't have that. Ah, now they're going low. Okay. Trying to make this very dramatic. Sorry. So we ended up with exactly what we didn't want. We had those S and R controls both being high and then both going low at the same time. So this is how you can induce this particular flip-flop to oscillate, right? And now, this is not something that's going to happen very often. You have to be extremely unlucky for this to happen. Realistically, you could, put it on your scope and hope to make this happen, and it would take 100 years. But if you have 2 billion flip-flops in your design, and you're clocking it really fast, this is not so unlikely. Yes?
I was going to ask if you meant unlikely to happen to us doing the lab?
Oh, not going to happen. No. If you come and tell me your design's not working because of metastability, I'm not going to buy it. No, it's not. And besides, it's not a recurring event. It's, right? So, yeah, no, I don't expect that it'll happen. And it would settle so fast you wouldn't even know. Right? It's not something you can really observe without a scope.
I do appreciate the effort put into that animation. That was a lot.
Do you want to see that again?
Yes.
Okay, so all right, so we're going to make the clock go from high to low, and then we're going to change D before we've captured the feedback wire has locked it in. Okay, we changed D. We made it go high before that feedback wire got it. Okay. Okay, so this was engineered to create a problem. All right, so there's one thing that I see too often in Lab 7, so I made a slide for it. So we can avoid it, hopefully. So one of these gates is a 3-input NOR, right? How would you build a 3-input NOR? If you only have 2 input NORs. Well, so too often I see this. This would work fine if these were OR gates, but they're not OR gates. They're NOR gates, right? Which means that the equation you're getting is this. You are taking, say, A and B, creating the NOR of it, and then you're taking the NOR of that with C, and so you end up with this expression. That's not what you wanted. You wanted this one. Okay? All right, so don't do that. If you want a NOR gate, you can, 3-input NOR gate, you can do it with first building an OR. But you're not going to have OR gates in your kit. So what do? Well, you will have inverters. So you can turn that NOR gate back into an OR gate. And if you don't want to use one of your inverters, you're going to find that you have some unused NOR gates lying around on those parts. You could just use one of those to make a NOT gate. So that's how you would make, that's one way to make a 3-input NOR gate. Okay, just don't do this one up here. Okay. All right, so I think now maybe you know where these timing constraints come from, right? The setup time is to allow that D input to make it into the circuit before the clock reaches it. Okay, and the hold time is to allow that feedback wire to lock in the value before you change D. Okay, all of these depend on how you built your flip-flop, the delays of those NOR gates, the wiring, other properties. Xilinx knows exactly how it built the flip-flops inside your FPGA, so it has all these numbers and it has estimates for them. And since they don't like customers to complain that their designs don't work, they're probably fairly conservative. Okay, and so basically we only need to meet the following timing constraints. We need to make sure that our new values don't reach the flip-flops before the hold time is up. So our combinational logic has to be slow enough so that we don't, oh, it's doing something, okay. And then it has to settle before the setup time starts. And when we talk about any device, it could be a flip-flop, any sequential device, we can talk about its setup time and its hold time, which are relative to when it receives the clock edge. Okay, so what are some other issues that we need to worry about? Okay, so clock synchronous circuits. We have a regular signal. The clock edge is the reference. Whether it's a positive or negative clock edge doesn't matter. Asynchronous circuits react immediately to input values and can oscillate as much as the input does. In these types of circuits, you have to worry about the signal all the time, whereas in our synchronous sequential logic, we don't care about any glitches or hazards that occur internally between the clock edges, away from the clock edges. They will not affect anything as long as our values are stable right around the clock. when we have an asynchronous input to our synchronous circuits, we did an example where this was a real problem. If you have an asynchronous input and it goes multiple places, there's a possibility that it will violate the setup time of one of the two devices. It will arrive not in time, in which case one device will have one value and the other device will have the other value. Again, this is going to create problems in your logic. And so what we do is we add a synchronizer, right? This is what you do in your labs with the buttons. You just put a flip-flop there, run the buttons through it, and then they're all synchronized with your design. Not that it would really matter at the speeds we're running. Okay. This isn't perfect. There's still a possibility that the asynchronous input could cause that one flip-flop to oscillate, right? You certainly can still violate the hold time and the setup time with an asynchronous input. And there's nothing we can do about that. There's no way to solve that. The way people deal with it is just have a chain of flip-flops. And if the first one's going to oscillate, hopefully it'll settle before the clock hits the second one, and so on. And so you reduce the chances of it creating a problem in your circuit. Right, so this, all we do is add another one, and another one, and another one. Okay. Another issue that we need to deal with that affects the hold time and the setup time is clock skew. So the clock is itself a signal, and it's being sent everywhere on the chip. It is probably the biggest signal in terms of wiring, almost going everywhere. And it's the one that's going up and down the most. Right? Every clock cycle has two edges. So a lot of effort is put into designing the distribution of the clock and making sure that it arrives at every flip-flop at about the same time. But we can't guarantee that. There's no way we can make sure it arrives everywhere at exactly the same time, but we try to minimize the discrepancy called the skew. As you can see here, if I have, this is my original clock, but the one that another flip-flop receives as a different, looks like this, it's been delayed by this amount of time, it's possible I can now have a hold time violation or a setup time violation. Okay, so clock skew and the speed at which you can run are related. And a great deal of effort is put into designing clocks or clock trees. In fact, I'm not sure if you've seen H trees. How many people have seen H trees before? Okay, so one way to distribute a clock is a structure called an H tree. So our goal is we want the clock to arrive at all the leaves at the same time. So what we do is we build an H. And if you look at the four leaves, their wiring distance from the source is exactly 1, 2, I guess, plus this edge. I won't count this one because this is common to all of them, but 1 and 2 edges. Okay, so that's good if you only want 4 leaves. What if you need more? Well, what you do is you put an H at every leaf. Okay, so now I have 16, right? Okay, and what more? I have 64. Okay, I stopped there. We can get going. Now this is a lot of wiring to do this. This is more wiring than if we ran down each row. And so at some point you're going to stop and say, okay, yeah, I can go down each row. Okay, but that's an H-tree pattern. And next week I'll show you the inside of the FPGA and how the clock is routed, and you'll see that it looks somewhat of an H-tree. Okay, all right. Any questions? No question. Okay, so this is, again, this is the one you're going to want to build for your flip-flop next week. And there is an equivalent design. I'm sure you can find it very quickly with Google that uses NAND gates. So if you have NAND gates in your kit, just do that. It works the same. But make sure you don't do this. Yes?
For the, because I assume we're making positive edge-triggered flip-flops?
No, it doesn't have to be.
We just need to make it.
You need to make an edge-triggered flip-flop.
Oh, okay. So if we wanted to make a positive one, would it just be?
You could just invert the clock. Yes?
That doesn't violate the, no putting gates in front of the clock?
This is a flip-flop is an asynchronous input. It's not, it itself is violating, yes. It has feedback. It's a combinational loop, right? But we are controlling it. It's like you cannot have a nuclear reactor in your backyard, but we can have a plant over in, where is it? Morro Bay. And they'll have nuclear reactors. So the flip-flops, but it's very controlled and resisted and analyzed, and we get kind of rules about using it. Yes?
How would you test our actual?
Well, so you will have two switches. One you will use for the data input, and the other you'll use for the clock. And so you'll make them go high and low. Or you can take a wire and plug the wire into power or ground. But the switches are a step. That's what we used to do, and then we've got switches. Yes? So the output will be an LED, and you'll be able to see then if it's high or low. Okay, I'll go over this on Monday. Yeah?
Just out of curiosity, as someone who's worked with breadboards before and blown up my fair share of LEDs on accident with bad wiring,
Yes?
I've heard about penalties for
Penalties.
having lab equipment.
So your lab kit will come with a fuse.
Okay.
Actually, it'll come with two fuses. The third one will cost you money for bills. Okay, and if you're caught powering your circuit without the fuse, that's serious.
All right.
Okay, the fuse is there to protect not only your chips, but also the AC power supply, the 5-volt power supply that's going to power your circuit. Meaning, I was going to go over this on Monday, if you start to smell something, that's not your neighbor, then your instinct may be to grab that AC. Don't do it. Let's first check if it's hot. Okay, this has happened. People have, unfortunately, shorted the power supply. But the fuse is there to prevent that. Okay, so you must use the fuse. Okay, so when people are done with their lab and they've got everything they need for the write-up, there's also usually a donation, a pile of fuses that are still good. and that might work for you. But with 2 fuses, you really should be okay. The key thing is don't change anything while you have the power plugged in. Okay, if you need to change something, unplug it. All right, I will go over this on Monday then. Any more questions? Yes?
So for that first design of flip-flop we saw, where it was just 2 D latches in a row,
Yeah.
do those have setup and both times?
Yes. Right, because you need this one, you need the, all right, so remember this is going through. So if you change D too close to the clock, it won't make it in. Right? And then just right at the clock, you could have a problem. And you could, in fact, cause this one to oscillate. Okay, all right. I'll see you on Monday then.